Hi. The extent to which one can learn data analysis tools like Python or R in more depth and quickly depends largely on the richness of underlying practice datasets. This is one of the core reasons why one can upscale on these tools more comprehensively while working on live projects and dealing with real world datasets. Another critical skill while practicing on these data analytics tools is to assess what questions or hypotheses can one validate while working on these datasets. I want to touch base upon both these aspects through this tutorial, and that is why I have divided it into two parts. Part 1, which is this video, I want to talk about how to create practice datasets in Excel. Part 2, which is going to be my next video, I will talk about how to use these datasets to assess what insights can be drawn. Let's begin. In part 1, I am going to focus on these three components. Let's start with knowing different type of variables and best ways to create these variables. Broadly, there are three categories of variables. String variables, which have only text values. Just to give you a glimpse of what different string variables there are, these could be names of people, geographical locations like city names, state or country names. These could be positional names or level names or movie names, or these could be company and brand names. Similarly, they could be labels or flags which go as string variables. Next is the alphanumeric variables, which is a combination of both numeric and text entities. Some of the most commonly occurring alphanumeric variables are employee IDs, which consist of both text and numbers, and the addresses. Even the email IDs have both text and numeric values. The numeric variables have four subtypes: binary, which has two values 0 and 1. Some of the real world relatable examples are sales forecast, number of employees, count of objects, things like revenues, amount, balance, budget, or let's say a probability value. The third subtype is a ratio or a percentage. And again, a relatable example is percentage score of students, percentage attrition in a firm, or percentage interest rate, or percentage of return on investment. Last subtype is the year or a date value. Now, except string variables, which are proper names of people, geographical locations, or let's say company or brand names, everything else can be created in Excel through the use of suitable Excel functions. When it comes to creating just a few sample names, one can manually create them in Excel. But for a longer list of names, let's say 10, 50 or more, online resources can be used. There are ample websites which are very good source of getting random names of people, places, let's say country, states or city, or popular brands or products or movies. I have listed some of these resources here. And on the right, I also want to show you one of the sample dataset that I was able to get from one of these links. And you can see it covers a lot of text variables as well as some alphanumeric variables. So other than proper names, one can create all the other variables in Excel by using suitable Excel functions. And that is what we are going to cover next in this video. In this section, I'll talk about how to create numeric as well as string variables using suitable Excel functions. Let's cover the creation of numeric variable first, and I'll use all these functions to demonstrate. The rand between function can be used to generate numbers between the specified limits. Out here, I've shown multiple examples where I'm generating different numeric variables. Let's say binary between 0 and 1, 1 to 9, 100 to 500, or even larger values. In one of these examples, I'm creating an ID where the initial two digits are repeating and the remaining digits is something that I'm creating randomly using the rand between function. Similarly, I can use rand between function to create float values or percentages. Here I'm dividing the resulting values by 100. Here I've increased the number of decimal places by dividing by a larger number. Similarly, we can create different values for years or dates. For creating random dates, one needs to understand how Excel interprets date as, which is essentially a date value. And based on that, we can specify the lower and the upper limits for certain dates and create random values between those two dates. Talking about the rand function, this function helps us generate random values between 0 and 1. Here is the basic working of a rand function. You can tweak this function a bit to contain the float values between the selected limits. In this case, it is generating random values between 0.6 and 0.8. Similarly, we can tweak this to generate values between 0.75 and 1.25. At this point, I would like to mention that there may not be a direct function to generate random text values or labels. But there is a workaround to this. And the workaround works like this. First, we can generate a list of unique text values that can be used to create text variables. And secondly, we can randomly pick items from the list based on item positions or their index. Index, which is a more popular term associated with lists. For the part of generating random numbers, we can use the rand between function. And for the part to pick up items from the list, we can either choose the VLOOKUP index function or the choose function. Let's now understand the working of choose function. The choose function does two things. It first asks the user to create a list of text or numeric values or both. Second, it asks the user to specify an index number and returns the item at the corresponding position in the list. Let me take you through an example. Here is a list of three items: rock, paper, and scissor. The choose function is creating a list of these three items by calling all of these items in the formula. And it is also asking for an input, which is a number, from the user. And based on this input, it identifies which item it needs to display, which is rock in this case. We can create the list within the formula of choose function, which is what I've done out here. And instead of asking the user to input the number value manually, we can use a rand between function to populate any value between 1 and 3, and based on that it can display the corresponding item in the list. Similarly, we can use the choose function to create a list of 12 text values, which is names of the months, and we can use a rand between function to generate numbers between 1 to 12, and based on the number that the function generates, it can throw out the name of the month for the corresponding position in the list. Next, let's see some of the examples on how to create string variables. In this first example, I'm trying to create a variable named label, which has five unique entities. These are the steps I'm following to create this variable. First, I'm creating a list of these five entities in the choose function. Second, I'm generating a random number between 1 and 5 using the rand between function. And based on this output, the choose function gets an indication what list item it needs to throw out. So the working of choose function in this example 1 is similar to the examples that we saw earlier. As long as I can pass a value between 1 and 5, including 1 and 5, I can keep on generating one of these 5 unique values in the label column. And this is exactly what I've done in all these 30 rows in this particular table. In the second example, I've created some random movie names and I'm trying to randomly assign movie categories to them. I will later demonstrate how I created these movie names. Similar to the earlier example, I first created a list of movie categories, but this time, since the list is a bit longer, I have not used the choose function. Instead, I first created the list of 10 movie categories along with an index column. And then I have used a VLOOKUP function in this column to look up the index value to fetch the corresponding movie category. Now all that is left is to vary the lookup values from 1 to 10 using a rand between function and get these movie categories assigned to these movie names. Let me spend a minute how this formula is working. As I mentioned, the lookup value in this case is a random number between 1 and 10, which I'm generating using the rand between function. And I'm looking up this value in the below created list of movie categories. And based on where the match is found for that lookup value, it returns the corresponding movie category where this formula is written. One can also use the index function in place of VLOOKUP to perform this task. In the third example, I'm adding one more text variable, which is the PGP rating column. Since the movie names that I've generated out here are dummy values, I'm assigning the PGP ratings on the basis of movie categories. I also want to ensure that I assign different types of PGP ratings to a particular movie category, especially keeping in mind the kind of PGP ratings that are more common or applicable for a particular movie category. For example, an action movie is more likely to have a PG, PG-13 or R rating. And similarly, a horror movie is more likely to have a rating which is not meant for general viewing purpose. To achieve this specific selection of PGP ratings for a movie category, I've done the following. First, I've added three different columns of PGP rating to my base list below, which have three different kinds of PGP rating for each movie category. Second, I have modified the VLOOKUP function, which now is doing a lookup on movie category instead of index earlier in the earlier example. Third thing which I've done different is In the index column, I varied that number from 2 to 4 using the rand between function because now I want to pick either of these three ratings columns while I do the VLOOKUP. So essentially, I do not want to assign all kind of PGP ratings to all movie categories and rather pick ratings from more appropriate subsets. Let's take another example to make this concept more clear. Let's say we have profiles of different customers with different spend pattern and we want to do certain campaigns for these different profiles. Now we may not be interested in sending all different types of campaigns to all different profiles. Rather, we would choose a certain subset of these campaigns for certain spends profile. And that is where we can make use of a similar kind of a function. In example 4, I am demonstrating how I have used character function to create single or multiple characters. Character function essentially returns computer characters based on index numbers. One can input numbers between 65 to 90 to get all the upper cases of A to Z. Similarly, one can input numbers between 97 to 122 to return all the alphabets in smaller case from A to Z. And one can combine and repeat these character functions to get multiple characters like I have done here. You can also look at what numbers you need to pick up if you want to generate a specific character, let's say of an uppercase or a lowercase out here. Lastly, I am demonstrating how to create alphanumeric values using numeric text or special characters. And again, you can use the char function in combination with concatenation function. Here, I have broken down the formula in different rows for better readability purpose. But you can understand that all I'm doing is passing different values in the random between function to generate different type of characters, be it uppercase alphabets, lowercase alphabets, or some of the special characters for which I've written the number out here. Having covered the Excel functions to create different type of numeric and text variables, let's now go to the part where we actually create some of the practice data sets. We can start to look at some of the common subjects around which we can create these practice data sets. From the list out here, we will create the bottom two datasets which I've highlighted. That is the movie database and the student evaluation dataset. Here I'm creating a movie dataset which has following variables. First thing that I've done is created a base list for creating the text variables. And as you can see, I have already taken examples of creating some of these text variables earlier. We can now focus on some of the other numeric variables. For example, this variable movie database ID, I am concatenating the string 17 and a 6-digit number using a rand between function. Similarly, we can look at how the variable viewer rating is being generated. This is essentially division of a 2-digit number by 10. I've created the variable number of reviews to be a function of viewer rating. Essentially, higher the viewer rating of a movie, the larger the number of reviews are there for it. And essentially, I'm using a rand between function. And as a lower limit, I'm raising the viewer rating to the power of 3. And for the upper limit in the rand between function, I'm raising the viewer rating to the power of 4. Similarly, for the variable earnings, I have made it to be a function of viewer rating, where I applied the exponential function on viewer rating. So the higher the rating, the more earnings is being calculated for that particular movie. Last is the variable year of release, for which again I've used the rand between function. From a practice standpoint, one can make these numeric variables independent of each other. Although I've demonstrated that number of reviews and earnings are a function of viewer rating, but a user based on his or her choice and make these to be independent of each other. And now that we are done creating a dataset, we can import this dataset in the tools like Python or R and start conducting some data analysis. But before getting into the actual programming on tools like Python and R, it is always helpful to list what questions can be solved through this information or what are the possible insights that one can draw out of this dataset. This is known as hypothesis making and validation through data analysis. Let's now go to the other dataset. Here I'm creating a student's evaluation dataset with these columns. As you can see, most of these columns are either numeric or text, and I'll not go into the exact detail of how I am creating each one of them. What I can rather do is talk about a core challenge in creating such datasets. But before that, let's talk about how many unique values are we expecting against each of these variables. I'll quickly give you a glimpse of what function I'm using for these variables. For classes, I want three types of values. Classes class 8, 9, and 10. For section, two values, section A and B. For roll number, I'm looking for 10 distinct values. Similarly, for subject, three distinct values. And evaluation type, six different values. Evaluation type is something that I've already mentioned out here as a list because this is a string variable. Now, if I write down the number of unique values for each of these variables in this table below, I can see that a dataset which will meet a combination of all these variables will need to have at least these many rows. This is essentially a product of all these unique values for each of these variables. So the core challenge while using rand between function to generate different values is that whatever dataset I generate needs to have all these different combinations of different variables captured in it. And for that, I need to iterate formulas for these different variables a lot more times than 1080. And that is the reason I have iterated these formulas for different variables for 10,000 times. Now, to make this data unique, what I need to do is remove the row duplicates from this data, and that is what exactly I've done on the dataset on the right. The way to remove duplicates in Excel is you go to the data tab and click on remove duplicates. This is something that I've already done on the dataset on the right. In this dataset, you can see that the row count is 1080. This which is essentially the number of rows in this table. One can also perform validation to ensure that all different combinations have been met while doing the deduping. Now all that is left for us is to create the additional two variables, which is score and maximum score. For maximum score, you can use the VLOOKUP function on the base list, which we created earlier. And for score in that particular subject, for a particular evaluation type, you can use the rand between function and you can decide the lower and upper limits as per the need. Similar to the previous dataset, it would be quite helpful to list what are the possible insights that one can draw out of this dataset. In the next part of the tutorial, we can look at listing questions or hypotheses that we would want to validate from these datasets that we created, and what are the different analyses that are required to get relevant insights. I will also cover some of the bonus content, which is creating numeric variables of more complex nature. We'll look at creating binary events data with a desired event rate, and we'll also look at creating a numeric variable with a desired distribution.